So, if you're a VTuber or content creator in general, then you most likely have heard about the Ryzen 3000 or 5000 series processors. If you haven't, well, I'm sorry to say you've been living under a rock this whole time, I don't know what to say. But anyways, my point is, if you're like me, you went out and immediately bought yourself a 12-core or even 16-core CPU, and then when you got it, you were disappointed about the fact that it wasn't the monster you thought it would be. However, what if I told you there's a way that you could actively tap into your CPU's thread ripping capabilities? And it's free. Hi there guys, I'm Kamizhou. I'm a VTuber and a content creator like yourself, and I'm gonna help you turn that monster of a CPU that you have into your So what you're gonna need for this is a piece of software called Process Lasso. You can head over to the link on the screen or down in the description below, where you can click on it and head to the website and download it. There is a pro version, but for the uses that we need, it's not required for you guys to go and get that. Heck, even I still use the free version. The only thing you guys will have to bear with is a 10-second pop-up every time you start your PC, encouraging you to buy the pro version. So with Process Lasso downloaded, you guys can set that aside and we'll get back to it later. But the next thing you want to do is optimize your OBS settings for streaming on your CPU. This will vary depending on what processor you have, and whether if you have a GPU with a Turing-based encoder, that's any GPU that is an RTX 2000 and 3000 series, or a GTX 1660 and 1660 Ti. For reference, I have a Ryzen 5900X, which is a 12-core and 24-thread CPU, and a GTX 1080 Ti. In the Output tab, you want to set your encoder to X264, and make sure that the output mode is set to Advanced if it isn't already. You still want to make sure that your bitrate is tailored to your own internet settings, so use the same as whatever you're currently using, or if you don't know, head over to speedtest.net to figure out what your upload speed and use about 70 to 75% of your max upload bandwidth as your bitrate. I'd advise you go with way less if you do not have transcoding available on your streams yet, such as 3000 or 5000 kilobits per second. For the CPU preset, you want to use either faster, fast, or at maximum medium. You don't want to go any further as the lower presets offer more diminishing returns for an exponential increase in usage cost. Which preset you use depends on what hardware you have, so I recommend you make a separate account on Twitch or on YouTube if you're using YouTube for testing while monitoring your CPU thread usage to determine which profile you should be using. Set profile to high and leave tune alone. In the X264 options, you want to paste the following string of flags and adjust the number of threads that you want OBS to use, as well as the number of frames to look ahead. You also want to set the buff size to whatever your bitrate is in megabits. The rest can be left alone. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, Kami, how do I find out what to set these to? That's where your second account that you made comes into action. You want to do plenty of test streams and determine what the capabilities of your CPU are. Unfortunately, this is not a process that you can rush. You need to know what sort of sustained load your CPU can handle without causing any performance problems elsewhere on your system, such as the games you're playing and the applications you're running. Using some software like Hardware Monitor or just Task Manager where you can see all the thread usage is an absolute necessity in figuring this out. If you're not spending at least 3 to 4 hours on this, you're not properly testing all the scenarios your system could be in while it's streaming. I personally spent probably around 10 to 12 hours total over the course of the multiple days testing, due to me streaming a variety of different platforms like PC games, console games on my Switch, and virtual reality. If you really want the best quality for your stream, then you really do need to be putting this amount of effort in. If you're eager to see for yourself what the fine details of the quality differences are between each of the CPU presets and NVENC encoder, I urge you guys to check out EposVox. A lot of the information I'm talking about with OBS here, I'm sharing from him, so be sure to check out the video I've linked down in the description at the end of the video if you're interested in that. The last thing you want to do in OBS is head over to the video tab and make sure that if you have a 1080p canvas, that you set your scaled resolution down to 720p and also set the downscale filter to bicubic. The fine details of the reasoning you could again check out in EposVox's video, but basically all you need to know is that 1440p scales evenly into 720p, meaning there are no approximations made with the pixels compared to downscaling to 1080p. That's it for the OBS portion of the tutorial, but keep your OBS open for a moment, since we're going to go back to Process Lasso and tie up some of those naughty programs so that they remain in master's control. The first time you open up the program, it may seem very overwhelming. Don't worry though, try to think of the program as a more polished task manager, so to speak. We'll be using this program to tell our CPU which threads a program we specify are allowed to use. Firstly, you want to find OBS in the process list, right click, CPU affinity, always, and select CPU affinity. Here you want to define which of the threads that you specified in OBS to use. I would recommend the last 12 threads if you have a CPU like me, but if you have an 8-core 16-thread CPU, I recommend you figure out how many threads you need for the games that you play and the apps that you use, and then set them accordingly to the last half of the CPU threads. You then want to right-click OBS again and exclude it from Pro Balance so that Process Lasso doesn't throttle the performance of the encoder. Speaking of which, as we're in Process Lasso now, any games and extra apps that you know that are particularly intensive, such as for VTubing, I recommend you set the threads that they use to the threads that OBS is not using. This way that performance of games and apps doesn't affect the quality of the encoding, and vice versa. Personally, I've just been lazy and just set all games I play to the first 12 threads. However, you can fine tweak these for yourself through more testing by figuring out how many threads each game you play and each app you use actually uses on your CPU. You can then assign the threads manually in the same way as we did for OBS to ensure that the performance does not interfere with each other. If you found the video helpful, please be sure to give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Also, check out the video up here, or up here, I forget which side it is on, where I teach you how to convert your model into the VRM format.